Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining virtual programming from the Kent District Library. I'm Diane from the Programming Department, and I'm really excited to be sharing with you a series of videos created by the Library of Michigan for the 2021 Michigan Notable Book Award winners. Author Conversations introduce us to the incredible writing talent in our state and prompt those questions that you might ask if you were to meet those authors in person. We learn about how they get started, what inspires them, and those unique details about their award-winning book that hopefully will inspire you to not only read it, but maybe do some writing on your own. Today's conversation is with Marie Bertineau about her book, The Mason House. I hope you'll enjoy this author conversation.
Hello, everyone. This is Tim Gleisner here with you today with the Michigan Notable Book Award winner, Marie Bertineau, author of The Mason House. Just remember that we are having a series of videos, Michigan Notable Book videos with the 2021 Author Award winners. There were 20 this year, and Marie is certainly one of them. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Tim.
Nice to see you. And I'm just wondering if we could just start off, Marie, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and really how you became a writer? Well, how did you go about that?
I took the long way. I think I started out, wherever I worked, I liked to do the writing tasks. So I sort of scarfed up on all of those.
Okay.
I worked in a communications office for a while, so I was exposed to a lot of the publications. We produced a lot of publications. There was always press releases, and there was editing activity, and so I found that really interesting. And then later I moved to an office where we primarily dealt with numbers, but we trained others on an accounting system. And so I took to writing the training materials, which I really loved, being back in touch with the words,
Sure.
And one day, my director came to me and she said, that I had an aptitude for the numbers, and she wanted to encourage me to return to school and get a degree in accounting, because she thought that would be beneficial for me to have those credentials, and then she could hopefully promote me on up within that organization. And I thought about that for a while, and I said, I don't really want to be an accountant. I want to be a writer. So I think it was at that point in my life that the shift occurred, and I really started working on that goal more seriously. But it took a long time.
Well, can I ask, when you had that goal, were you thinking about fiction, nonfiction, a combination of it? What were you thinking when you said, I want to be a writer?
I was thinking about fiction, actually. And back then, I had it in my mind that I wanted to be a serial romance writer. That's what
that would have been a very lucrative way to go.
Yes, that was kind of my goal. And I was sort of active in the Oklahoma Romance Writers Association activities. A friend and I would go to those activities, and I was researching and writing a lot back then, just as a hobby.
Right.
But that was originally what I was going to do.
So why writing? What was it that drew you to writing and wanting to do fictions, first serial romances and then later others? But what drew you to wanting to become a writer?
I think I always liked writing. Writing was a really good way for me to process my emotions and my thoughts and feelings. And you'll probably find as we talk that I write those things a lot better than I speak them. So writing was just a trusted means of communication for me since childhood.
I mean, you talk about emotions. I mean, that's definitely a vulnerable act. I mean, did you find it easy from the beginning to share that writing with people? I mean, or did it take time for you to become, and I use the word vulnerable, but I mean, that to me, that's what that is. And so, I, I mean, did you do that readily, or did it take time to, actually be willing and able to share that with others?
I was able to do that with really close friends, in childhood. I had, because my family moved a lot, I had a pen pal that I had made in my early teen years. And we wrote all through high school and really into young adulthood and regularly, like, a couple times a week. And
Sure.
so I gained that ability to, process my life through writing mostly with my pen pal. And then, but I wouldn't share that with others really. I took creative writing in high school, you share there. But I was nervous as an adult about sharing my writing for sure. There's a it takes a lot of um, confidence, I think, to be able to do that. And and I never thought in my life I would write a memoir, actually. I thought I was going to write a fictionalized story about my family. But once I did it, I think I was just at the age where I felt like I'm okay with this. Maybe I felt enough time had passed where I felt okay to reveal these things about us. And so I convinced myself that I could do that.
You convince yourself, but the first
Yes.
thought I have in my mind is, I mean, talk about the ultimate act of vulnerability. You're writing about your past and about your family. I mean, how did your family? Was there anyone that you needed to go to and say, "Hey, I'm doing this"? Was there anyone that you had to maybe not get approval, but just give them a heads up that this is coming?
I told all of my family, and my family all read the book
Okay.
before it went anywhere. I wanted everyone to know what was being said. I wanted their input, because some of those memories were so I mean, I grew up in that book, right? So a lot of those memories I had to collect from other people, especially those really young ones, like when I was, 4 or whatever. So I needed their input. And luckily, the things that I did write, they they remembered it the same way. So my family all read it, and those were the only ones that I went to. The last one that I talked to about it was my mom, and there is sensitive material about my mother in there for sure. I finished the book before I told her about it, and asked her if she would read it, and she agreed to do that, and she was very supportive of my effort.
Okay, so let me ask you. So, I mean, obviously, probably didn't do this all in one go. How often were you writing this book? Like, how? I mean, first of all, how long did it take in duration? And would you write 10 pages a day, 100 pages a day? Maybe not 100, 20. So, I mean, like, what was that process for you writing this book?
I I developed a habit because I had been working full time, um, and then I left that job because of health reasons, which was one reason I started the book, because I was having a lot of grief. I was grieving loss of my job. I was grieving about my health, and so I wanted to do something positive for myself in that time.
Sure.
And so I thought, well, I'm going to sit down and write this story that I've wanted to write my whole life, and it helped me to write regularly. I got up in the morning and everybody was gone. My son was off to school. My husband was working. So I could just get up. I had the house to myself, and I would just sit at my desk and write, usually until 1 or 2, from 8 until 1 or 2 in the
Well,
afternoon. And I did that every day, Monday through Friday. And I
okay.
didn't write like word count. I usually wrote, I had in my mind what I wanted to write that day. It was usually a scene, and actually my book is sort of comprised of like little mini stories that
Mhm.
involve the scene that I had in my head. So that's what I would do. I would try to work on a scene.
Okay. And did you have like a plan laid out, vignette to vignette or story to story, or did you know
No, I
as it
just did
evolved?
every um, strong memory that I had in my mind. I thought I'm going to write every strong memory I have. And then I had this big collection of little stories. And then I got a binder out and I started trying to place them kind of linearly in that binder. And then
Okay.
I worked from that.
So how long did that whole process take, Marie? Like, was that a year or 2 years?
It took about a year to do the first draft. Yep.
Okay. Okay. And the idea, you said you had always wanted to write a book like this. I mean, first you started off as an accountant, then you wanted to become a serial romance writer, which, seriously, you could make a lot of money doing that. I hear. That's what I hear. So my question is like, when did you have this idea? Was it when you were young? Was it when, you had your son? Like, when did this idea start germinating in your head?
The idea for this particular book, you mean?
Mhm.
I had always wanted to do something to pay tribute. A major character in my book is my Cornish grandma. And I'd always wanted to write a story about her to pay tribute to her because she had such an impact on my life.
Hmm.
Uh, Not only in my childhood, but really all through my life. She was, I feel, like a spiritual guide to me.
Really?
So I thought that writing a book was the greatest way I could honor her. And
Very nice.
I just only at that time, all the pieces came together so that I could do that. And I think too, I had spent enough time, I had enough um, wisdom of life to reflect back on that story the way I needed to write it.
So describe her to us and to the viewers here. I mean, like who was your grandma? Why was she so important? What was it about her? And now I don't want to give away the story, but just what was it about her?
Um, I think that, well, number one, my grandma was really funny. She was a Cornish immigrant, a first generation Cornish immigrant, and she was really comical. She was very eccentric. Um, she was a flawed woman. She was an alcoholic, um, but her home provided a safety net for me because my home, my childhood home, the home of my parents, there was addiction there as well,
Mm.
and violence. And um, so going to my grandma's was just a place of safety and a place where I could feel like a happy child and safe child. And so, I don't know, that's how I came to view her.
Okay, very nice. So, what's the theme that you think runs throughout this book? You obviously had to take out. What were you looking to capture with these stories that you were collating? And the question that comes to my mind is, what did you take out, and what's going to happen to those pieces that you might have taken out? So, I guess my question is, what were you looking for in that linear story? What did you want to convey to your audience?
I'll admit that when I first started writing that story, I viewed it as a really lighthearted story because that's how I viewed my grandma, this kind of comical character.
Sure.
Um, I thought, oh, I'm going to write this story about my funny grandma and it's going to be, really interesting and lighthearted. But then as I started writing these scenes, I realized pretty quickly that there was such melancholy to them
Mm.
and a gravity there. And so I knew very early on that I was going to have to um, go with the tone of that story. It was pretty much writing itself, honestly, and so it became something completely different. Um, and it took me a while, honestly. I didn't. I guess I'm more of the pantser in that I didn't plan out that story. I just wrote it, and then I looked for what was the thread in there, what were the themes in there, and worked to kind of um, bring those out more and and analyze them more.
Okay. And so what were the themes? What do you think the themes were? What do you think the reader should be looking for when they're reading your book?
Well, grief is a big theme in that book, grief and loss, um, how we live with our grief, how we react to our grief,
Mm,
how it affects our development as children and our futures. I
sure.
think that's one of the main themes of the book. But also, uh, hope is a big theme in that book as well, because beneath all that was going on, there was always hope in our family that we were going to survive it and it was going to get better. Um, and I think, I say hope, and for me, it was like hope of living a better life, hope of living a life that, I felt I deserved as an individual, a life
Sure.
that felt true to me. And as children, we aren't in control of that. Someone else is.
Hmm.
So you have to have that hope. And then when you become an adult, you are in charge then. And you can take all of that you've carried, all these dreams and expectations of what life should be, and you can start putting it into action.
I've talked to several authors before. Something that really grabbed me when you said, this just started writing itself.
Hmm.
And I'll be honest with you, I can be a bit of a control freak sometimes. And I just wonder, like, I'm like, when you actually start feeling it as an author, that it's starting to write itself, it's not going to be a humorous story, it's going to be melancholy. I mean, are you sitting there trying to rein it in, or are you just like, you know what? Nope, this is way organically, this is the way it's going, and this is how it's going to come. I mean, like, I'm just wondering about that process. And I'm sorry, this is also for authors and writers, and that's why I actually try to do it this way. So does that make sense what I'm saying? I mean, like, do you struggle with that when it starts to kind of just go in its own direction?
I did struggle with that, but not because so much of the writing process. I struggled with that because of my family. I didn't want to, at the time, I didn't want to reveal those things. They
Mm,
were very personal and painful. I didn't want um, to think about that. I didn't want to go back there. I didn't want that as part of my book. I wanted my book to be happy. And so that's why I thought that initially. But it came to be that my family was okay with it. So I had hired or contracted with a freelance editor to look at my story before I started querying it. And she really was helpful with development. She didn't know my family. She knew nothing about the story. So she was able to just read it for what it was. And she also said, you're going to have to go there, whether you
oh,
want to or not, to make your story complete.
also
And
she pushed you. I mean, she pushed
yes,
you, right?
she did. And she was right in that, because I was dancing around it and hiding it. I mean, I was alluding to it, but I wasn't going in there.
Right,
And
right.
that's how I felt safest. And so she said, you're going to have to do it. And so I talked with my family and my siblings at first, and they said they were okay with it. And so that's what I did.
So was that, I mean, one of the questions I have is, what was the hardest part of this whole experience? Was that the hardest part, or was there anything else that was the hardest part of writing this book?
That was one of them, definitely, the
Okay.
painful memories, because going in there and thinking about all those details, you put yourself back into those memories and you have to collect those details and you have to think about the emotion of the moment, and it becomes very visceral, and that's frightening at times. So yes, that was very hard for me. The
Yeah.
second thing that was hard is kind of the writing process, was that growing up in the book, um, I had to kind of forget what I knew so that I could write as that child, and let the truths um, gradually reveal themselves, and let my opinions gradually develop. Things that I have right now as the writer, I had to
Right.
let that happen naturally in that linear format, and so it was hard for me to restrain that, my opinions back then. I couldn't have those at that time. I didn't have those at that time. So, and that's how I chose to write that book. And so that was hard for me to do.
So, I mean, how did you do that? I mean, how does one even, I mean, I can think of myself as a 4-year-old child, but I wouldn't know how to, I mean, that must take some training, I would think, no?
I there were a lot of revisions. Let me just say that there were a lot of revisions before it went anywhere.
No, that's fair. No, that's good. That's good.
I could, once you do it for a while, you write for a while, and you start seeing, like I would make a statement in a chapter before that statement needed to be made. It's
Sure.
like, wait, I didn't even know that then. I can't say that. So I just had to find another way to observe things. Like if I observed something about my grandma that I know now as a woman, reflecting back, oh, that's why she probably acted that way. I didn't know that then. I only saw her actions. And so I just tried to not tell my reader this is why. I just showed the reader what was happening and let them kind of take it from there.
Okay. So,
That's the best thing I could say.
no, you're fine. Let me ask you, I mean, so, my impression is this is like your first memoir writing experience, correct?
Yes.
Did you have to read other memoirs to understand like what you need to be doing with this memoir? And I only ask because I wouldn't know what to do. So what did you have to do to, was there someone or some writer that you were modeling yourself after at this point, when you decided, okay, I'm going to write this?
Okay, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I didn't read memoir before that. I was a fiction
fair.
reader. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't read memoir. And so I went to like a half a day program that the library presented about preparing to write a memoir, and we did
Nice.
exercises, and we did lists and things. And so that was all I had that I recall going into that. I did not read memoir until I might have read maybe one or two in my whole history. I don't even remember what they would be, but I didn't read memoir until I was done writing my memoir
Right.
for my book proposal, because you have to find comps when you do query, right? So
Oh,
then I started having to read all these memoirs to see what is mine like. And that's when I saw all the different ways that people write them.
okay.
And that was a really enlightening experience for me. And I did find a couple that I felt I was similar to in how they set up their story, but everybody writes memoir differently.
Yeah.
Some reflect all the way through it, as the adult, and there was only a couple I think that I felt most similar to.
Okay. So I've got to put a plug out to the library. Which library did you go to the memoir class at?
It was in Minnesota. I was living in Minnesota at the time, so it was Carver County Library,
Okay. Very
which is
nice.
in the Minneapolis area.
Yeah. So very nice. So let me ask you about your story itself. So would this story, I mean, be possible anywhere else other than Michigan? I mean, would this story have any relevance beyond the borders of the state? And how important is the state and the culture of the state for this story?
I think the Keweenaw is integral to the Mason House. I just don't think I could have that story without it. I mean,
Why?
the Mason House itself is, well, number one, it's a salt box, and it was built by the mining company. Copper mining is such a huge part of our area.
Sure.
There's so many stories here. There's such a rich history and so much depth to this area. And I grew up amongst this array of cultures because of the immigrants coming, to mine. I lived amongst the Cornish and the French Canadian, which is part of my heritage, the Finnish for sure, the Italians, and then I had my reservation, Anishinaabe Indian community, only like 30 or so miles away, and so my relatives from the reservation were coming in and out of my life. I had that influence. So I had a lot of characters in my childhood, to
Right.
use, to draw from. And then also, my childhood coincided with the demise of the mining operations up here, or the reclamation aspect of those operations, which was the tail end of it all.
Mhm.
And so there was, um, I don't know, there was a sadness to the people here. The community was struggling. There was economic hardship. A
Sure.
lot of our family members were leaving. They were going away to find work. And so in many aspects, I think some of us who stayed behind, we felt a little left out. We felt left behind. So I felt that as a child. The Keweenaw also, I mean, you just can't think of it without thinking of the landscape and the
Mm.
weather, and then there's Lake Superior and the Portage Lift Bridge and the Stamp Sand. Those are huge characters in my childhood,
Right, right.
and they're characters in my book as well. So I would not be who I am if not for the Keweenaw.
Okay.
The Mason House would not be what it is. It's just really important to that book.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. The Keweenaw is definitely singular. I mean, I've never been to a place quite like it. I been living in Michigan for 20 years and from Wisconsin, originally, and quite frankly, going to the Keweenaw is like going to a different world.
Yeah.
Is it just me, or do you guys feel removed up there? I mean, it almost feels like you're part of a different world up there compared to Michigan or Wisconsin. I mean, is it just me, or being an outsider? I don't know.
I do think we feel a little remote. I do think, we feel like we have to take care of ourselves in a lot of respects because we are farther away from others. And so as a community, it probably does feel a little bit like an island.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
And really, I mean, I lived away for a long time. We moved and I married and lived in Oklahoma and Minnesota, and then only recently came back within the last few years. And it was very hard for me to get comfortable again because of the remoteness. Take some adjustment.
Okay, okay.
Mhm.
So with the pandemic and everything else, what do you think is the relevance of your work right now for the reading public? What would you say is the relevance, and quite frankly, why do you think people should read your book?
Why do I think people should read my book? Um, I think my book is a story of hope, and so I just feel like sometimes there's struggle there, but hope prevailed, and so I think sometimes we all need to be reminded of that possibility.
Okay, all right. And your current work, what are you working on now?
I'm not actually working on a another book at this time. This The Mason House took a lot for me because I was a debut author, number one. So there was so much marketing and just things about publishing in general that I needed to learn. So I'm learning all of that, and and that takes a lot of time. And then another big thing that's happening right now is the writing of that book really reconnected me strongly with my um, Anishinaabe roots. And so I am really studying my culture right now. And
Nice.
that takes a great deal of time.
What are you learning? I'm fascinated by that. What are you learning in your Anishinaabe?
Well, language for one. I am studying the language through the Sioux tribe. They do virtual lessons now because of the pandemic, which has been one of the blessings. If you're going to think about a blessing of a pandemic, then it's been one. It's all the Zoom activity.
Sure.
So I take online language lessons there, and go to conferences and things that I otherwise probably wouldn't because of the travel.
Sure.
And then I can go to my reservation. Of course, a lot of things were stopped there as well because of the pandemic. But before the pandemic, we were doing a lot of different teachings, and I went to Rising Camp, which is a weekend long activity where we learned all about monomen and harvesting the rice, processing the rice. I
Sure.
went to a camp or a day-long activity where we processed all the medicinal tobacco for our tribe. That was really interesting. And so at every one of those activities, you gain some knowledge and some insight, and I feel like I am honoring my Anishinaabe grandparents as well.
So I got to ask. I mean, obviously, you're learning about the publishing industry. You're learning about the Anishinaabe. But do you think? I know you're not working on one, but do you think there might be a future book on maybe that set of grandparents, your Anishinaabe grandparents, and that family, or the genealogy even? I only say that because I'm a family historian. But I mean, is that something that you would consider in the future?
I think I'm leaning more towards fiction on my next one that involves that side of my family, but a fictionalized story about it.
Okay,
So that's kind of in my mind right now.
But what if the Muse captured you though? Would you go with it? And the Muse captured you on this one. Would you go with whatever was coming at you at that point?
Oh, sure. I think it's something inside you that drives that writer. So you have to just go along with that.
Okay, and then just to finish up today, Marie, I guess, what did it mean to you to be selected as a Michigan Notable Book Author?
When I got that email, I ran into the other room screaming and jumping up and down, and my husband was like pale as a sheet. He's like, "What?" I still can't believe that I'm here, that I'm talking to you about the Mason House. I just never thought that would happen. And I don't know, it means so much because the Mason House now has a place in Michigan literature, and my Cornish grandma has a place in the literature. The sweet town of Mason, which I love, has a place, and my Anishinaabe grandma has a place. So my family story, all of that is so priceless to me. So
it's fantastic. I can tell you, the committee, once we saw your book, I mean, we knew that it was something that should be selected, and it's just a great piece of literature, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your contribution, and wanted to say thank you to all the viewers out there today. We're talking with Marie Bertineau, the author of The Mason House. If you haven't read it, please get it. It is a great book. And as always, there are other videos coming out about the 2021 Michigan Notable Book Award winners, conversations with each of them. And Marie, thank you so much today.
Miigwech, Tim.
You have a wonderful day.
You too.